Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is great to see all of you. Bienvenue à tous. C'est vraiment un grand plaisir de vous voir encore une autre fois pour BIONATION. Good to see everybody for BIONATION. This is, I think, our sixth or seventh in the series. I'm Andrew Casey with BIOTECanada, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody. And it's your pleasure not to have to hear me speak at all, really, today. I'm just going to have the honor of introducing a couple of people, but I'll give you a lay of the land today. First, we're going to have a short conversation with André Picard and Brian Heath, who's the general manager and vice president of Amgen Canada. And then we're going to hand the panel over to André. And then we are going to welcome the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the Honorable François-Philippe Champagne, at around 10 to 4. So we're going to try and manage all this over the next little while. Looking forward to a great conversation. Today's session is really focused on the future of healthcare and where demand meets opportunity. As I said, this is the sixth in the BIONATION series. Really a timely subject matter given everything that's going on in the world. So I'm going to welcome André Picard onto this virtual stage, and he is definitely in that category of people who really generally don't need a lot of introduction, because any of us following the biotech healthcare policy landscape, André is one of the preeminent commentators, observers. I think observer might be the most important feature of your work, André, because I find that you do phenomenal work of just taking stock of what's actually happening out there and presenting the data, the evidence, and allowing a lot of us to form our own opinions. So fantastic work that you do. I know all of us follow it very closely. It's fantastic to welcome you here today. You've just completed a book that takes a look at seniors at a very critical time. Obviously, the pandemic has really put them on in the spotlight at the very early onset of the pandemic. They were the hardest hit. In a lot of cases, you try and make sure that you don't lose sight of the lessons learned, and your book seems to pick up on that. So maybe just Neglected No More, for the benefit of the audience, is the name of the book. But André, maybe just talk a little bit about that, because I think it sets the scene nicely for the subject matter that we're going to grapple with today. And so I'll just maybe ask you to just sort of give us a sense of the book and the timing of it.
Yeah, it does fit into today's theme, because today's theme is opportunity. And to me, this was an opportunity to write about a long-standing problem, the care of elders, and where does this fit in the aging society? How are we going to care for people as they get older? So I think it's an issue that touches a lot of people personally. And COVID, as we know, devastated the nursing home community. We've had about 24,000 deaths in Canada, and 17,000 of those were in these institutional care facilities. So really, really dramatic impact. And that's just, again, opened this opportunity to write about, well, how do we fix that? How do we make sure people are getting the right place, getting care at the right place at the right time? I asked people some questions in there that I hope we'll all talk about around the dinner table, which is, how do I want to live out my final years? Choice is often a dirty word in Canadian healthcare, but this is about having choices and figuring out where you want to go, how you want to live, how you want to die. How do you live in dignity, and do we have a social safety net that helps ensure that?
I think what I found interesting is the premise that there are answers out there, right? It's not like we've got to start something that we've never seen before, that we have no idea how to do it. You looked around the world, as you usually do, you gather the evidence, and you found obviously some answers that are already out there, that we should be lessons that we could learn from other countries, other jurisdictions, and sort of anything there that we should be thinking about as Canadians.
I think a couple of things. Something be familiar to the industry is we study a lot. We study Canadian problems a lot, but we don't always act on these great recommendations. We're world champions of report writing about healthcare, but implementation, we're not so great. And that's a lot of the book is about. It's a very short book that was deliberate, and because the theme of the book is we know all the problems, we know all the solutions, and it's mostly about implementation and telling practical stories about how to change. So, just where should people be cared for? Should it be home care? Should it be institutional care? How do we have supportive housing? And I think a big theme of the book is about philosophy, which again applies to the industry. Once you decide something is important, if you say, elders are important, we want to keep them in the community. So that's what something like a country like Denmark does. You have a philosophy. And once you have a philosophy, doing the plumbing is pretty easy. Then you just put your values into play. And I think it's the same in industry, and government has to decide this sector is important, and then we're going to invest in it, and then everything flows from there. So I think the philosophical part of the puzzle is the really important one. I think every Canadian individually, you know, they love their moms, they love their grandmothers, they want them cared for. And I think it's just taking that individual belief and putting it into collective action, and the problem gets solved pretty readily.
And of course, you know, there's always a temptation to put everything into a silo and think you can solve it within the silo, and there's nothing to be gained by in other parts or in other silos. And I think nothing could be further from the truth, particularly in the healthcare space. So I think seniors can be an important starting point for us as a society that we can learn from and grow and develop and build on for all other parts of society. And today's discussion is really going to focus on that opportunity to really sort of develop and bring solutions. Brian Heath is here from Amgen. They've had a really exciting announcement today that really captures that spirit of investment and innovation, growing companies, growing the ecosystem, and developing solutions. And so, Brian, I couldn't think of a more timely opportunity to have you as partner in this BioNation series today. Maybe a little elaborate on Amgen's announcement and what you see for the future for the company.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and also thanks to BIOTECanada for inviting us to be part of this roundtable discussion. And André, interesting hearing about your book. I do think that there's a lot of relevance to the subject that we're discussing. We like the BioNation partnership because BioNation aims to advance policy environment around the biotechnology ecosystem in Canada. For Amgen, a lot of people don't know, it stands for Applied Molecular Genetics, and it has its roots as a biotechnology startup in California. And as a pioneer, we've been applying advanced human genetics to unravel the complexities of disease and develop therapeutic medicines. So we focus on areas of high unmet medical need. We leverage our expertise to strive for solutions that will improve health outcomes and dramatically improve people's lives. This year, Andrew, we celebrated our 30-year anniversary in Canada. In addition to our Canadian headquarters in Mississauga, Ontario, we also have a world-class research facility out in British Columbia, and it specializes in the discovery and development of human therapeutic antibodies. So in recent months, I'd say the government of Canada has acknowledged the importance of attracting investment into Canada's life sciences sector. And as a global leader in delivering breakthrough biologic medicines, Amgen Canada is committed to working with governments and other stakeholders to be a partner in the research and development and innovation sector, and also to foster greater resilience in our healthcare system. And this resilience requires a new approach, which is focused on predictive and preventative care, value-based healthcare, public-private partnership, and better adoption of health innovations. And we think we can be part of that solution. So the announcement today that you referenced is an announcement about a collaboration between Amgen and the Canadian Centre for Regenerative Medicine. So together, we will build a program to identify, develop, and commercialize promising therapies. And it's a stellar example of how the life sciences ecosystem can bring global capabilities to bear on transformative, cutting-edge Canadian health innovation. And really, in order for companies like ours to continue such investments in Canadian capabilities, the government will need to do its part to create this attractive policy environment. And global competition for life sciences investments hasn't been any more intense than it is now. And so Canada needs to take these bold steps to stand out from other nations. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today. I think it'll shed light on the opportunities to advance both better economic and health outcomes for Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple pieces that you elaborated on, which I think are absolutely critical. One is the new form of R&D that the industry undertakes. It's completely changed over the past 10 years. And this partnership and investment with the CCRM is a great example of that. Your facility out in British Columbia is another good example. It's just the new form of how we're going to do research and how we're going to develop companies in this country. And I think it's really exciting to see. So as you point out, it's a really important asset for the ecosystem. The other part, which I think is really exciting, and Cynthia is going to be able to elaborate a bit on this, but it recognizes a really strategic strength of Canada, which is in the regenerative medicine space. It's been well recognized that we have great researchers and scientists in that area, and CCRM has taken a real leadership role over the past couple of years. And so this partnership and investment, I think, is a real recognition of that, and it looks to be going to be growing much more rapidly. And of course, look forward to the outcomes in terms of both companies, but also more research and science that comes out of it. So congratulations, and great to have you here today, and look forward to hearing a bit more about this with the panel. So I will do that. I will introduce the panel now. That is my job. And so I'm going to pull up my cheat sheet a little bit to make sure I've got everybody listed here. But I'll ask André to come back on. He's going to chair this session and welcome Molly Shoichet, who's from the University of Toronto, and also the founder and CSO, Chief Scientific Officer of Amgen. Cynthia Lavoie, who's the President and Chief Investment Officer of CCRM, the Canadian Centre for Regenerative Medicine, and Philip Tagari, who's the Vice President of Therapeutic Discovery at Amgen, and a board member of CQDM. Oh, cool. There's another intersection with the ecosystem in Canada. So welcome all. I'm going to pass it over to André. What André is going to do is have a discussion with everybody. You're welcome to throw some questions in through the Q&A icon down at the bottom. André is going to sort of follow that and pick up on themes in some of the questions, not go through every question specifically, but if there's some common themes or really sort of good angles there that we need to dive into, he'll do that. And so I will pass it over to André, and I look forward to a fantastic discussion. Thank you all for being here with us today, and over to you, André.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, for that kind introduction and for setting the stage a bit for us. As you heard, we're going to focus today really on opportunity. There's a lot of issues in this field. We're going to focus on the opportunity piece of the puzzle. We know that we're not going to talk about COVID-19 specifically. We're going to take a little break from that. We're going to look a bit at how the pandemic has opened up opportunities. We've seen politics, the economy, the social landscape shift a lot in recent months. So there's many opportunities. We also know that science is in the spotlight like never before, probably getting more attention to science today than since a man walked on the moon. I think that's the parallel. That's a good one. Really, we used to gather around our TV to see the man walking on the moon. Now we gather around our computers to get the latest vaccine news and the latest treatments, etc. And clearly, governments are taking notice in addition to the public. The biotech sector is obviously seen as a pillar of economic recovery. We saw that reflected in the recent budget. I counted more than a dozen biotech initiatives in the budget, more than $3.2 billion in spending. So you've got their attention. You know, $1 billion strategic innovation fund, $500 million for an industrial research assistance program, $500 million for the CFI, Canadian Foundation for Innovation, $400 million for a pan-Canadian genomics strategy, and on and on and on. A little bit of money for the Tri-Council for a biomedical research fund, money for high-cost drugs for rare diseases. A long, long list. I'm sure we'll hear more about it from the minister later, but it'll set the stage as, you know, there are opportunities. You've got the ear of government, so we want to talk about what we can do to cash in on this. So I want to kick off the discussion, as you heard, with a few little questions, and I'm going to watch the chat box for your questions and integrate them into the conversation. But I want to start with a very general question for our panelists. You know, the word innovation appears 167 times in the federal budget. Journalists do weird things like that, like count the number of words. So I want to start by asking each of our panelists, you know, what does innovation mean to you? What does this politicized term mean practically? Maybe Molly Shoichet, we can start with you. What's your definition?
Sure. Thank you so much, André. And it's so wonderful for me to be on the panel with Philip Tagari and Cynthia Lavoie. You know, when I think about innovation, I have to first think about invention. And when I think about invention, I have to first think about research. And so I often think about this spiral that goes from research, making that discovery, realizing that you've invented something. So then you go up to invention. And the spiral continues to innovation, which is distinct. You know, an invention is, you know, an intellectual property, it's a patent, it's a new idea. But innovation really goes beyond the invention. It's around commercialization. And so then you've got that innovation, and how do you commercialize it? And then if you're really going to be good at what you do, you're going to go back to research and back up that spiral. And so the spiral continues with that continuum of research, invention, innovation, commercialization.
That's a nice image. I was thinking of a DNA spiral as you were talking. So a nice image. Philip, Tagari, do you want to build on that? What do you think of when you think of the word innovation?
Yeah, so first of all, it's great to be on this panel. This is a very exciting topic for us. Years ago, I would have thought of it in the kind of Molly's view of invention. Carrie Mullis, going up the hills behind UC Santa Cruz and smoking a substance and inventing PCR. Okay, and that's a foundational innovation of our industry, in fact. These days, I see it much more as convergence. So, things that perhaps are, mainstream in one sector suddenly start to transform another set of activities. And, we are seeing this big time, in biotechnology, in healthcare research, which is, the convergence of digital technology. And you'll hear a lot spoken about, machine learning, deep learning, AI. The convergence, or kind of the renaissance of, semiconductor technology that's related to biotechnology, so through optics and mechanics, and then, just an enormous advance in our understanding of life sciences. So, I think from my perspective, it's these things, it's the convergence and the crossover between these disciplines that are creating, an incredible amount of innovation. I mean, an astonishing amount of innovation.
Cynthia, I saw you nodding. What do you think of when you think of innovation?
Certainly, thank you again. I'd like to thank BIOTECanada for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm very honored to be with all of you here. So I agree with obviously what everything that Molly and Philip have said. The innovation is the practice of developing things, but in life sciences, it's really what drives us is really developing inventions that provide patient benefit. And so when we take it the distance, we then think about innovation not only from the scientific point of view that Molly referred to, the commercialization of that, which I think we're all involved with around this table, and also and we'll speak maybe a little bit more to that later, the production of the product at the end, and we can speak to biomanufacturing, for example. And I think there's certainly conversation around biomanufacturing right now. So to me, innovation is not solely the idea, but getting the idea through to the end user, and in our case, of course, the patient.
And you said the word commercialization. I was going to just kick in and say nobody said commercialization, but can you build on that a bit? Sometimes that's a dirty word in this field.
Well, I hope it's not a dirty word, because that's certainly what I've done most of my life, and Philip probably, and Molly as well. But commercialization is the pulling out of a technology towards a solution. And I think there's science that's foundational, which is very important. And I think, Molly, you were speaking to that when you were speaking about the original invention. It's foundational to how we understand a process. But there's some technology that can be commercialized and should be commercialized. And then there's a process. And that process includes intellectual property. It includes proper development, proper financing, funding early on by governments, financing by groups, private equity groups, by venture capitalists, by pharmaceutical companies and partners who can help that development along. We spoke of the collaboration between Amgen and CCRM. That's an important piece of that commercialization.
Great. And Molly, you do both sides of the puzzle. You do that foundational research. You are in the business sector with the commercialization. Are those at odds, or are they part of a continuum?
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to use that word continuum as well. I really do see it as a continuum. the research advances knowledge, and it's so exciting because you're trying to answer questions nobody's been able to answer before, right? And so there's a lot of drive and excitement around just doing that fundamental research. In our field, we're really interested in taking that fundamental knowledge and advancing it to, towards benefits for patients. And so I see it as a natural continuum. They're very different, though. In business, you're really trying to make a product and bring it to life. Whereas in research, you're really trying to advance knowledge. So if you're trying to advance knowledge and then ultimately have it be commercialized and help people, then I do think of it as a continuum. And that was what I was trying to say with this spiral idea. And I loved how, Philip, you brought in the comments around convergence, because I couldn't agree more. And it's such an exciting time to see all of these formerly siloed disciplines converging.
And does, just to build on that, does all knowledge have to be commercialized, or can we have knowledge for the sake of knowledge?
No, that's absolutely not. And sometimes knowledge will be commercialized, in 20, 50 years, and sometimes it won't. I mean, I think one of the great things about research is it builds on itself, right? And so sometimes you make a discovery and you don't actually know how important it is until somebody else that maybe somewhere else in the world does another experiment, and you're like, wow. And then you get to do something else, and so the curiosity-driven research is so important, because we don't quite know how it's going to be used yet. And that's where, sort of the Nobel Prizes come in, and that's why they're often given out, 20, 30 years later, because we don't know until 20 or 30 years how important that fundamental discovery was.
And I go to the Gairdner Awards every year for the last decades, and it's always those same stories. I never knew this would be something. It was just tinkering in the lab, and there was magic 50 years later. So it's interesting. Philip, I want to ask you, because we're talking about opportunity, where do you think the opportunities lie in this field? Or maybe a better way of asking it is, what are you passionate about that you think has opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two kinds of opportunities. The first is the opportunity to collaborate. The field, is essentially in its infancy. We kind of think we're good at, some things, but regenerative medicine is future looking, and it's very clear that novel collaborations such as between Amgen and CCRM, between small companies and large companies, between institutes and non-profits, having effective collaborations in this space, I think is really, really important. Okay, and I think Canada has done a fantastic job of fostering a network where collaboration in regenerative medicine is very, very strong. And then, the other real opportunity is bringing value, particularly as you said in the introduction, to older patients. Many of the kind of most promising areas for regenerative medicine, osteoarthritis with, joint regeneration, Parkinson's disease with, central nervous system regeneration. These are very typically, chronic and challenging diseases, for older individuals. And so I think there's an enormous opportunity to provide, both individual and societal benefit through regenerative medicine.
And Cynthia, same thing. Where do you think the opportunities lie? Maybe Philip already talked about regenerative. That's an obvious answer for you. Are there other areas you think of too where there are a lot of opportunity?
Certainly. I mean, within regenerative medicine, it's pretty broad now. I mean, we think about the examples that Philip mentioned, but we also have cell and gene therapies. These are new novel therapies that require changes to how we previously thought about treating patients. And so there are a lot of novelties along those lines. So, and with that comes a need for thinking differently about different aspects. The development, the intellectual property actually is quite different on some of these types of therapies. Because it requires a lot more collaboration, a lot more combination of technologies to get the therapy to the patient. And of course, there's the manufacturing piece, which I bring in, given the background of CCRM and the efforts that CCRM has made in that sector.
And we've heard a couple of times in the introduction, we heard from Philip, you know, regenerative medicine is one of Canada's strengths. So how do we ensure that we play to the strengths? How do we, you know, run with the ball when we have a good sector like that? How do you ensure it stays strong worldwide?
Well, I've got to say, I mean, what the pandemic taught us is there's a need for preparedness, and there's a need for building capacity locally for delivery of technologies that are either vaccine, and to my prior point about cell therapy, to some of these technologies that need local delivery. And so, one of the points that I think is important for Canada is we've built a scientific strength in regenerative medicine, which includes enabling technologies, cell and gene therapies, and other types of regen med. We are now building, and actually as we speak, capacity and capability, both in the manufacturing side, which is so important in several of these technologies. And that feeds, of course, the vaccine production side as well, which is so important and is so much on our minds right now.
Right. And Molly, we already have some good questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to throw one of them. One of them is aimed at you, so I'm going to toss it your way. They're asking, in your staircase analogy that you used, where should we be investing our government money? Should it be in the tri-councils in that basic research, or should it be more in these venture capital funds, et cetera, as we saw in the recent budget? Which makes the staircase stronger?
Well, so thank you for that really great question. And, I hate to say this as my answer, but really the answer is both. Because if we don't have the research, then we're never going to have the inventions, the innovations, or the commercialization. So we really need to invest in the research. And at the same time, if we don't invest in the rest of the continuum, then we won't have that either. So I think one of the really important things for government to do is to use their levers, or use their funding as levers to bring in additional funding and use those as partnerships to bring the ecosystem together. I think that's a great, government has great convening power, not just to bring people together, but to bring opportunities together.
And you've had the opportunity to work with government. Is it hard to sell them on the both message?
Well, I see the honorable minister is here, so we should ask him. But it's I was very heartened by the budget and the investment in research and the investment in the bioeconomy. I think this is a huge step forward for the federal government. I'd like to see the provincial government come in and participate as strongly. And but when we look, we can't help but look to the United States and see the enormous, more than the 10 times that we normally go from Canada to the US based on population, but the enormous amount that they are investing in their research, understanding that as the seed. And then also all the different programs they have to bring that to life. But also, I think the private sector is coming in and really, Philip, you talked about convergence. It's not just about areas, it's convergence as we see with Amgen and CCRM today, but also hopefully with the academic institutions, so that you have that continuum partnering together at the very early stages.
Bienvenue, Monsieur le ministre. On va vous entendre bientôt, mais j'espère que vous êtes là pour écouter nos panélistes.
Moi, je vais vous écouter. I'm so happy. And Molly, you were way too nice. You know, speak your mind. Don't worry. I'm able to take it, but I don't want to interrupt. We'll have a chance, but we can address that question, André, if you want later. I'll turn over back to you. I just came early because I was excited to listen to you. So here we go.
Merci, bienvenue. So, Philip, we've heard a couple of times hints about this Amgen CCRM collaboration. Can you talk to us a bit about this as an example of how collaboration is important? And I think it's a good example, practical one.
Yeah, from the very basics, we at Amgen are 1,000 scientists. We're 1,000 really good scientists, and we have a phenomenal pipeline as well as marketed products that bring tremendous value to patients and payers and societies throughout the world. But we understand that there are millions more scientists throughout the globe, and so finding ways in which we can access basic research which informs our own labs, but importantly collaborative partners where we can advance together in areas of interest is incredibly valuable to us. And so partnerships such as CCRM are really we see as a new model for creating private public innovation networks. Through CCRM we access a broad swath of Canadian science, and conversely Canadian scientists who are interested can access Amgen's unique capabilities in understanding disease, in understanding the development of biologics, in particular the development of cell therapies. So it's a really kind of good synergistic opportunity, and it's one that we found is very scalable. So the collaboration with CCRM, it's a very light touch, just a few people involved. Decision making is very rapid. And we feel that it's a really good opportunity to advance those very kind of early ideas that come out of the labs from people like Molly to that point where we understand, are they going to give value in the next year, or to Molly's point, are they going to give value in the next 10 years? So it's a really interesting model.
Now, Cynthia, maybe you can build on that a bit. Regenerative medicine is obviously not just a Canadian issue, it's a global issue. We often worry, can Canada be a player globally? Does this kind of collaboration help that, make us more of a player globally?
Absolutely. I think we spoke earlier about commercialization. I think the important pieces of commercialization are funding, they are financing, and they are partnerships like the one that we have with Amgen currently. So, CCRM invests in several ways, and through Service for Equity, through our CDMO, or direct investments, or we found companies. And because of that, we have quite a good pipeline and inflow of opportunities across Canada that we can look at because of our expertise in the field of regenerative medicine. That's been built over the years with several of the other organizations that are centered around Regen Med in Canada. And I think that has now come to a point where we have invested in this space for probably the last 10 years. CCRM has been around for 11. And we're at that point where we can really make a difference globally in the field. That with the expertise that we get from the team at Amgen that are helping us out with this collaboration, as well as the expertise that we have in creating and producing these products going forward, because that's a really big piece of the ability to make these available for Canadians and frankly in the global economy.
And Molly, we talked earlier about how science is really in the spotlight like never before. How important is that public buy-in, that public interest in getting investment, getting interest in these fields in biotech?
It's so important. And I think really it's so important because we need to continue to attract the next generation of scientists into our field. And so by having that spark, that curiosity, getting the next generation to understand that they get to invent the future. To me, that's so exciting. But, so often I would say in Canada, most of the wealth is people who are in business or financial services or real estate. It's not so much. We've had a lot of investment in tech and perhaps not as much investment in biotech. And so realizing that, you can invent the future and also, make a great living for yourself, that I think is critical to the future of Canada. And that comes from, moms and dads encouraging their kids to go into science, and, brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts, and that's the public, and so having the public trust the science and embrace it, I think is critical to the future of our country.
And do you worry that will create unrealistic expectations? We have this vaccine that came almost in miraculous time, right? And we just have this feeling that science can solve everything magically. Does it create unrealistic expectations that things can happen overnight?
You know what? I think it sets the expectation that if we are creative and innovative and prepared, then we can actually solve a lot of the problems. Science can't, it can't change, climate change. We have to actually change some of the ways we live. But no, I don't think it, I hope what it does is inspire people to think bigger and bolder and to think about doing things differently.
And Philip, if you could build on that, do you think the public policymakers recognize this, that all those years that are behind the magical appearance of a new product or drug, the vaccines, for example, there is a decade of research on mRNA, for example, and happened to be really timely. Do you worry about that people don't recognize all that background work?
Yes, that's an enormous concern for us. There is in some sectors a belief that great scientists in great labs like Molly invent something, and then the industry extracts it from them and figures out a way to sell it. And that is a long way from the truth. If you look at the delivery of innovative healthcare and medicines, it's been a long partnership between the biotech and traditional pharmaceutical industry, between basic scientists, regulators, and institutional science. And so I think getting the message out that we all play a part in delivering valuable healthcare to patients who need it, that's a message that I think we all need to work on. But I think it's also important to realize that the pace has picked up. We have been in the mode for years where, my team can bring forward a really good potential therapeutic, and it's like, see you in 10 years time, maybe. And the answer is that's unacceptable now. Every year that we waste in delivering a medicine that could save a life or save someone's sight or save someone's mobility, that's a year wasted. So I think one of the things that has happened is, the expectation of urgency in our industry, and I think that's a good thing.
And maybe Cynthia, you can flesh that out a bit. I've heard this statistic many times. It takes 17 years for an innovation to be adapted within the Canadian health system. How can we close that to get new stuff on the market to patients quicker?
I'll give you an interesting example. Just the regulatory group here in Canada, Health Canada and the Therapeutics Directorate, have really made some improvements in terms of the conversations that they can have with early stage companies to develop products, and even more so than in the US. There's an opportunity to have a conversation, you know, pre-start of clinical trials, for example, in Canada, that even people in the US are saying, well, you know, actually, I may want to go through Health Canada because I can get a better, sort of more fulsome interaction with the regulatory agency here than they can in the US. In the US, they ask a question, they get an answer, and that's about it. So I think there's several ways that we can actually help in Canada, that we can really, and that we've done in Canada, to improve the process of developing therapies for patient benefit. And what that does is, if that comes to Canada in the form of a conversation with Health Canada, then it's in that path towards being approved for Canadian patients. So that's one example, among many, of course, that we can contribute to. The other one, and I think I've repeated it a few times, but is to create manufacturing locally, because in certain circumstances you need a domestic source and a domestic biomanufacturing capability and capacity. It's in times like this, when you have a pandemic, I think, you know, it shows if you don't have the capacity to provide these therapies to your patients domestically.
Yeah, and both those examples you gave are very relevant to the pandemic. We saw the vaccines get approved in record times, and we saw a lot of national angst over our lack of domestic production. So both really important issues to tackle. So Molly, I want to come back to you because I think there's another good question, viewer question, that I think I can throw your way, because you know government well. Person is talking about this gap between the GDP to R&D, you know, how much we spend compared to other countries. Canada spends 1.54% of the OECD average of 2.47%. So a $22 billion shortfall. I'm going to take it for granted this person has their numbers right, but the message being, we spend a lot less than some other countries on R&D and public investment. Is that important to fix that gap, and why?
Yeah, it's, I think those are the same numbers that I've heard. And, you know, I think it's embarrassing that Canada invests so little in R&D compared. This is just relative to the OECD average. You know, I think in China, they probably invest even more. And so within those, you know, quote unquote, emerging economies. So I think, you know, actually, I remember our Prime Minister saying that we want to, you know, invest in what's between our ears and not below our feet. And so in order to do that, we really have to invest in the research infrastructure, the research economy, and it's not just the fundamental research, it's the R&D. And this has been a systemic problem in Canada. It's not that it just happened this year. But there is a huge opportunity, I think, for us to really take this moment and recognize the lack of funding that we've had for so long. We see every day in our unvaccinated population the trauma, in a sense, of not investing in our R&D economy and in the bioeconomy. And so this is such a fantastic moment for leadership and investment. And so we really have to, I think this is the moment. If we lose it, we'll just be talking about the same thing again in a decade, because we've already been talking about this for a decade.
And maybe, Philip, you can build on that a bit. I know a company like Amgen spends a boatload on R&D. Is there a lesson for government there on the payoff of doing so?
Yes, you know, we you know, depending upon the particular year, you know, invest around 20, sometimes over 20%, you know, of our total blood and treasure in R&D, and it is the source of innovation. It is the source of new medicines and new therapies. And it is the source of an enormous amount of collateral good, okay, that by investing in the whole ecosystem of biomedical innovation, you get not just new therapeutics, but you get new diagnostics, you get more insights into preventative medicine. You can create medical delivery systems that are far more resilient, far more flexible, and adapt to the needs of populations around the world. So, absolutely, we're a research-based organization, and so. But we see that it's more than just investing in laboratory science. It's investing in the entire ecosystem of biomedical science.
Right. Now, we only have a few minutes left. Everybody's eager to hear from the minister. But before we wrap up, I always like to end panels on a hopeful note, especially in these times that are not always hopeful. So I want to ask each of you what gives you hope, what gives you optimism going forward about the sector. So maybe I could start with you, Cynthia. What gives you hope going forward?
Oh, and we mentioned it during the discussion, really the speed with which the life sciences community, and that includes government, it includes big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies, biotech, and the academic community come together, how they've come together to find a solution to provide patient benefit in this situation. I think, that the rapidity with which that was done is hopefully something that we can hold on to going forward. It's very important, as Molly said, to have foundational science. It's also important to make sure that those opportunities, those discoveries make it to the patients.
And I imagine that the science itself must give you some hope, especially in your sector, this notion that you could regrow a limb or, spinal cord. That's so science fiction and exciting in itself.
Oh, André, the things we see is very exciting. And yes, it does give us a lot of hope. And we are very excited about what we're seeing today.
Great. Philip, I'll ask you the same thing going forward. What gives you hope in industry for the biotech sector?
It's just, the astonishing explosion of science and technology. When I started my career in the biopharmaceutical industry, almost 40 years ago, and when I look back, we were almost like in the Stone Age, chiseling rocks with hammers. This is a genuinely new age of biomedical science. And I think, the events of the last year have just, accelerated that enormously. It's a very, very exciting time to be in the sector.
Yeah, regenerative medicine, AI, gene therapy, machine learning. There's so much stuff going on. You can barely keep up, but it is all exciting. Now, Molly, you're one of the most inspiring scientists in Canada. I know you're a very positive person, so I want to give you the last word. What gives you hope?
Well, thank you for that. And when you were talking about regenerating spinal cords, that's the research that we do as well. So it's always funny to have your research described as science fiction. But I am very positive about, as we've talked about today, the next generation of scientists inspiring. Like, how inspiring has this been, I think, to the next generation for that creativity and, as Philip said, that convergence of bringing fields together, and even within diseases we see. Don't just think about regenerative medicine of getting a tissue to regenerate, but think about the other parts of the biological system that come together, that become part of that puzzle. So I think as the complexity of the puzzle, or as we understand more of the complexity of the puzzle, we can come up with more exciting and perhaps better therapeutics that will really make a difference in people's lives. So I'm really just optimistic about where the future lies and being part of that, solving that puzzle.
Well, thank you very much, Philip Tagari, Molly Shoichet, and Cynthia Lavoie for allowing me to be part of this fabulous conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew to introduce our guest, the minister.
Andre, thank you. Molly, Cynthia, and Philip, thank you very much. A fantastic discussion. Lots of ideas that now I get to throw at the minister. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. Minister, bienvenue. Fantastic to meet you. Thank you very much for joining us here today. I am Andrew Casey with BIOTECanada. We have not had the chance to formally meet, and I guess we don't get to really meet in person for a little bit of time yet, but we'll have to make do with this. But a big welcome. For our audience, Minister, you are the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. You came from, I think, Foreign Affairs. Before that, you were at International Trade. So some really interesting portfolios that touch upon the industry a number of different ways. So thank you very much. I know you are extremely busy, as the government is, generally speaking, at this time. And so we greatly appreciate the fact that you're able to take some time and be with us today. Thank you for coming a little bit early and actually hearing some of that conversation, which I hope you found both enlightening, but I hope you find it optimistic and forward-looking.
Well, it was inspiring, and sorry, Andrew, to crash your party or your meeting, but my other event finished a bit earlier, and I really rushed to be able to listen to some of that, because I mean, I remember the question from André, who was asking, what gives you hope? And I would say my answer, listening to all of you, you give me hope. You all give me hope from what I've heard from Molly, from Cynthia, from Philip. It's truly inspiring in so many ways. I remember one said, the next generation, you invent the future. How much more inspiring it could be to say to young people to go in STEM and to go in research and to go in science. I think it's the golden age of science, to be honest. When we've seen, I feel Canadians, and I'm talking to you from Shawinigan, you know, so rural Canada, but I think Canadians have reappropriated the power of science. They may not understand everything that goes, and obviously I'm surrounded by experts and leading scientists. They may not understand all. I got my vaccine here at a clinic, which you didn't have to wait, you just go in line. You know, the face of the people, they were appreciative of the work that's being done. They understand there's a lot of background work. They may not understand the whole science. And we're talking about artificial intelligence, regenerative medicine, quantum computing. I mean, things that they may know, but one thing they know is that thanks to the people who are on this call today, you know, we have made enormous progress. And if I think about the world, it's interesting because today I did things on climate change, and now I'm doing on biomanufacturing. The two things since I've become minister a few weeks ago, I say, you know, what keeps me awake at night or makes me wake up early in the morning is, on one end, is biomanufacturing, making sure that never again, every morning and every evening, I say we have to be more resilient. One thing we learned, we just need to onshore more, whether it's about lipid, adjuvants, fill and finish, syringes. I mean, we will not be able to do everything, but one thing that I'm keen with you all is to rebuild the ecosystem, because we know that talent attracts investment. And I'll give you a story. Recently, I had one of the pharma company CEO call me saying, and what they say about Canada is we're a safe bet. That's very interesting. Stability, predictability, rule of law. But overall, he said, you didn't create a mess of our supply chain. So he said, I love you to start, you know, you're a safe bet. And I won't tell you which other country, but in his view, there was only 2 countries in the world where they would want to go next. And Canada was one of the 2. But what he said was fascinating to me, because usually when you're the Minister of Industry in Canada, people come to you because they ask for money most of the time. Not all the time, but, you know. And the first thing he said, Minister, let me ask you something. If I come to Canada, do you have enough talent for us? I thought that was interesting. And it all goes about what you were talking, talent attract investment. So the first question, do you have enough talent? Because that's going to be. The second thing he said, will you allow us to plug into your AI clusters that you've built in many cities across Canada? And thirdly, we came about contribution, because I said it publicly, and I thank you, Andrew, for that, to somehow educate and to make people understand there is no world today in which you can attract significant investment in life sciences without government being part of the equation. I mean, I think it's Cynthia who said it, or Molly, I can't remember, but we're in a global competition. Yes, we have reinvested in the life science industry. We put another $2 billion I often said within what the World Health Organization declared a pandemic on, I think it was March 12th. We came with 200 million within 12 days of that. And then we added another 600 million. We had almost $1 billion in a month. But you're quite right that one of the biggest challenges we're going to be facing is that we are competing for talent and investments. We know that if there's one thing which is mobile, is talent. Talent will go wherever the opportunity is. And I understand, I spent 20 years of my life abroad. So talk about people coming in and out of our country. But I think that for the reasons that you mentioned in the ecosystem and the universities, and if anyone is thinking, can you attract investment? Yes, you can. Look at what we did with Sanofi. And you talk about R&D. People were asking me, yes, government is contributing, sure, but they're going to invest 500 million within 8 years. So whatever we put, we're going to get back in R&D. And R&D, what I love is that this builds the ecosystem. It builds the innovative companies that are represented by what you're doing at biotech. So for me, that's why that's interesting, because those are kind of anchor investors or anchor investments that we can bring, and hopefully, and we always make sure that the whole ecosystem will benefit from that. So yes, I'm inspired by what I hear, and I think that there's never been a better time. I think someone said, I don't know if it's André, but honestly, if we don't seize the moment now, I don't know where we're going to do it. I came in this portfolio, as you said, Andrew, they moved me a bit around in Ottawa. I had infrastructure in between as well, and I started in finance. So there's a couple of, but one thing I've seen is certainly that the biomanufacturing, and what I love is that biomanufacturing invests a lot of innovation. And we know that innovation leads to prosperity. I mean, you just have to look the history of innovation around the world, whether it's countries we can look at, successful countries. I can think of Japan, Korea, I can think of the UK, Germany. I mean, when you invest in industry which are rich in innovation, you create prosperity. And that's why I've been so keen from day one to tell the team that for me, there's nothing more important to rebuild the ecosystem from one investment to the other. And I think the last budget you were kind enough to mention, Andrew, is giving us the means of our dreams. Now we need to deliver. We need to work together. I need you more than ever. Actually, I need you more than you need me, I think, being surrounded by the speakers that I've heard. But one thing is that where we can work together is how can we make Canada the most attractive place in the future? I know we have an history which, you know, government policies of all stripes, supply chain, tax policies, different things have led to where we are. We can only learn from that and say, okay, but what I say to people is on one end, we have to fix something for the long term, but that should not prevent us from doing strategic immediate action. We are in the middle of a health emergency, and whatever we can do, whether it's in the fill and finish, making sure you saw investment like in Vido, which I love in Saskatchewan, where they go from the One Health concept. It's not like animal health and human health, it's One Health. Medicago, we brought Novavax in Canada. We can think of Accelera, Precision Nanosystem. I mean, many companies which are going to be, and I love what I heard when someone said mRNA, by the way, was invented, I think, by Canadians. We can claim that. And well, they moved south. Now we're trying to bring them back north. But mRNA is one thing. And that's the thing. We are great at creating. We are great at inventing. We are great at in the life science sector. Now, how do we commercialize? How do we scale? And how do we use, we may not have everything, but what I know we have is talent. And talent for me is a key piece. And we have very creative companies that you represent and are here today. So sorry that I needed to let the passion out and then answer your questions, but you could not stop me from sharing some of the passion, because I talk biomanufacturing even at dinner at home to a point that, you know, I believe in what you're doing and the future in it.
I feel for your family. I would have stopped you if I thought you were going off track, but as I listened to you, you have a very firm understanding of what the sector is all about and the importance. Now, of course, as you point out, a pandemic will have that impact, where it'll sort of, you know, reinforce the idea that maybe this is a fairly important place to start to look to grow, so that we're prepared for future pandemics, because I think we do have to prepare for one. Let's hope it's not for a long time, if ever. But it would be foolish for us not to prepare for it, and you alluded to that, obviously. But the other part that I find very encouraging about what you're saying is you're not seeing it as an expense that has no return on it. You're seeing it as an investment, and you understand that when we've put all this investment into our research institutes, our STEM programs, and Molly referred to this, the youth that are coming up, and as you say, see this and see how the industry's developed the solutions for this space, and not only in this pandemic, but as you point out, for climate change in other areas. It's an exciting place to be, and the industry has shown itself to be resilient and obviously grow, as Acceleras and Mercados have attracted investment, had IPOs, even through the pandemic. And so I think it could be a really central part of the economic rebuild. And so that investment piece that you talk about is really important. I think that when you look at the budget, a very significant amount of investment right across the entire space. Maybe just some of what you were thinking as a government, as a minister responsible for most of it, and how you were seeing this sector as an important investment from a government policy objective standpoint. Talk a bit about that.
Well, one thing you said, and you made me smile, I feel you almost at the cabinet table, because I often make a difference between an expense and an investment. And maybe it's my days when I was at infrastructure, but for me, there are two different things. You know, the expense is the current, you know, is what we need to do to keep government functioning. Very important things. For example, when we did the wage subsidy, we would say, yeah, it's an expense, a very much needed one, in order to face the biggest, I would say, health and financial crisis of the century. But I also make a big distinction with investments, because investments for me, and that's why I often say why I'm so much attracted to the biomanufacturing sector is how do you maintain and create the jobs of today, but in the industry of tomorrow? And many discussions I had with leaders in the industry was, bring me to where we're going to be 20, 30 years from now. What can we do today to make sure that even in an intergenerational equity, that the investments we make today, we are sure that we're creating, maintaining the jobs, but in an industry where our kids and our grandkids will be able to work, because we know that that's where the future is going. So that's why I was very, it seems you've been with me at cabinet, because when I make pitch, I always make a distinction, what is expense and what is investment? Because investment, it's the type of thing when you're attracting or you're investing, and you mentioned Accelera. I mean, sure. I mean, this is like for decades to come. I mean, you are on a track to something that is going to be driving innovation for decades to come. So that's why I'm excited. Same thing when I think of Vido, you know, the One Health concept. Now you're going to lab 4, level 4 lab. So trying to understand the Zeonic and what's going to be happening. I mean, clearly that by definition has to be the future in terms of discovery. If you think about Medicago in Quebec City, which is probably the closest homegrown COVID vaccine that we have, there are phase 3 clinical trials. So if everything goes well, we'll have one. And the fill and finish, you remember part of the thing when we were saying, why would big companies didn't want to do the tech transfer? I said that many times, and I think you helped me. It's not that they didn't want to come in Canada, it's that they were saying, Minister, your fill and finish capacity is around 30 to 35 million. We're going to do in places where we reached 100 to 150 million. And even the Serum Institute, you're talking about 1 billion. So, you know, the type of tech transfer, and I'm talking to people who are in companies who are tech rich. If you're going to do tech transfer, it's usually the same people in the company. You're going to do it in a place where you have the biggest volumes in order to help you. So rebuilding, for example, the fill and finish is going to be helping us to attract more of these future tech transfer. Like you said, now we're talking COVID. I don't have a crystal ball. You don't have one. We see variants. We're surrounded on this call with people probably can tell me where it's going. There's different views, there's different discoveries. Science is evolving. And one thing I think Philip said that before, which I found fascinating, is time has accelerated. I think citizens, it's no longer 10 years. Sorry to put more pressure on you, but the sense of urgency, people have seen what you can do in COVID I know it's extraordinary. I don't want to say that's the new normal, but certainly that's what people are going to be expecting, that you can, it just shows also that when we all pull and push in the same direction, we can do things. Now, the budget, I think, was interesting because not only we have the means to continue to invest, but there were things that you said, for example, in the health and bioscience economic strategy table, there were some learning. There were things that you mentioned as to how can we come back as a global hub for clinical trials, for research, for development in the industry. One of the things that struck me is that you were talking about issue around access to skilled labor and executive talent, which were somewhat of a barrier. And there we invested in something you probably know well, the Anne-Marie program, just to make sure we could help train executives and have more talent in the sector. Obviously, the Strategic Innovation Fund has dedicated fund for us to continue to go forward. I can think also of the Venture Capital Catalyst Initiative, which we targeted life sciences as part of that. And also by replenishing the granting agencies, which have been key in addition to the ARAP program with the CNRC. So I think now we have, I would think from a financial perspective, now what we need to do together with you and obviously those who are with us today is where do we go from there? You know, now that we have that, what strategy can we put? I have been trying to work. I said my job is to expand and accelerate in the short term because clearly there was an urgency. I don't want to say the urgency is behind us, but certainly now we need to look also ahead and say, okay, what's missing? What are the gaps? Where can Canada distinguish itself? Like I said, I won't be able to onshore everything. Probably would not make sense economically or for other reasons. But where can we play or where can we make a difference? Not only for domestic consumption, but for the world. I was on the G7 call this morning, and one of the things that comes always is the resilience. Is if people feel as Canadians that we could have been better prepared. Well, I can assure you, every country that I've been talking to, even in my previous role as Foreign Affairs Minister, was the same feeling. So now there's a sense of resiliency. How can we be more resilient? How can we think more holistically? Should we partner, for example, with the UK? They have done great things that we could probably partner with. Our friends in the United States, which are very keen to think about continental strategies to be more resilient. And I was with Secretary Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, and she's very keen. I remember our first call, I was saying to her, I said, I just want to, I said, I'm sure you know, Madam Secretary, that Canada is your biggest customer. I said, we buy more from you than China, Japan, and the UK. I said, be good if your biggest customer would be vaccinated, don't you think? And so that we can vaccinate everyone, so that we can restart. But those are the type of initiatives we have to think, how do we plug the gaps? Where can you help me as a group and say, Minister, we understand the fill and finish part, fine. That's kind of, I don't want to say basic biomanufacturing, but it's needed in order to attract some of the tech transfer. But where do we go from there? Where you talk about regenerative medicine, for example, how can we become a leader? And what can we do there? Because most of the companies are here in Canada. And I've been talking, reestablishing relationship, I would say. And I'm aware that there's a journey together. But one thing I've been trying is to be as close as possible to each and every one of you to say, tell me, where can we fill the gap? How can we be the best partner? And I'm a big believer that life sciences is a sector that Canada used to be a champion. We are still in many ways, but in terms, obviously, vaccine was probably a place where we realized we may not have had the capacity we wanted. But clearly, the future when it comes to life sciences, I think citizens have realized that this is going to be one way or the other. If it's not a pandemic, it's going to be something else. But there's nothing more important than health. We saw that when people are scared about their health, everything else stops. And so clearly, if we can if we can do that. And I'll just finish there. When I heard President Biden yesterday, for example, challenging, say, can we put an end to cancer, for example? Can we put an end? I mean, so there's like an appeal, a sense of togetherness in that. And I think that should be stimulating for Canadian companies.
I think you're right. I mean, expectations, you're entirely correct. Expectations are high, but you know what? This industry has risen to those before, and clearly the pandemic has shown it can do it. It's interesting, I think, back to your opening comments about how people sort of have shifted and have a better understanding now of science and the real solutions that this industry can bring. And it reminded me that even in the Pfizer vaccine is not Pfizer, it's Pfizer, BioNTech, and a little company called Acuitas, which, as you know, is a Canadian biotech company. And the other pieces don't come together unless you've got the Acuitas part. And that's the new model. That's that cooperative model where the large multinationals and they're partnering with the smaller companies. And that's what we're seeing throughout Canada. Today, Amgen announced their partnership with CCRM, which is really exciting. That's going to drive more innovation and research forward. And that's the type of stuff that we've got to see more of. And I'll say, I know you've got to go to another meeting, so I'll let you go. But you said it early on that usually people come to you asking for money. So I'm going to say I'm not going to do that right now, and I'm going to pick you up on your offer, which is use us as a resource. I think you've clearly signaled as a government that you recognize the importance of the sector, the investment dollars, and you recognize that more investment needs to come to the space. There's now a life sciences fund. Let's grow that. Amgen, which is hosting this event today, everybody wants to have an Amgen in their country. How do we grow AbCellera, Medicago, you name Vito? How do we make them an Amgen company where they're here in this country? They create spin-offs, more jobs, more opportunity for the youth coming out of our STEM programs or our universities. You look at Medicago, it's out of Laval University, AbCellera is out of UBC, Vito is out of University of Saskatchewan. These are phenomenal achievements, and how do we grow them and make them companies? I think we've got an amazing opportunity. Full credit to your department and the government. Early on in the pandemic, they reached out to us. We were able to put them in touch with key leaders from our community that helped on both your vaccine and the therapeutic task forces. The HBEST, that table, of course, is full of people from our community. Whatever we can do going forward to support the government in this regard, don't hesitate. Lean on us as heavily as you want. We're more than happy to provide the time and the expertise, which is, as you point out, is in abundance in the sector. So don't hesitate. Reach out to us, and we're happy to support you in any which way we can.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And you're right. What I saw with Amgen, and I should have started with that in CCRM. That's the type of thing we want to see. I did a lot of matchmaking during this few weeks to try to see which company in Canada could support. There was tech transfer of different companies, and still much to come. I mean, I'll leave it there to say to each and every one of you, let's seize the moment. I mean, there's never been a better time, I think, to look at what we can do in this sector. The second thing I would say, let's be ambitious. I think we have everything in Canada to be ambitious, and the sector, the people, and I would say, finally, let's rebuild the sector together. I can play a part in that, but certainly I need you and Brian that I see appearing on my screen from Amgen. I need all of you in this journey, and I'm really honored and pleased to see your passion, and so we'll continue to be in this together. And Brian, I think you wanted to say something, so I'll stop there, listen to you, and then I'll be signing off to talk more about biomanufacturing. Believe it or not, the next event is biomanufacturing. So here we go, Brian.
Hey, well, thank you very much. Maybe I'll just say thank you to Andrew and BioNation for hosting the event. Thank you to Andre for facilitating such a great discussion. We had a great thanks for our panelists, Philip from Amgen, and Molly from the University of Toronto, and then Cynthia from the Center for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine. Minister Champagne, I think your comments were inspiring. You have a clear view around the assets and the resources that are unique in Canada and that are attractive for investment. And I would love the opportunity to hear your lecture around investments versus expenses and how healthcare and life sciences are, in fact, an investment. So for me, I thought the discussion was robust. This concept of an arc of innovation and invention and commercialization and R&D and manufacturing means something to me, because the analogy says the ark does not perform its function if it does not have all of the pieces in place to support one another. And so I think we all see more resilience here in Canada in both our economy and in our healthcare system as we continue to build the convergence that we were talking about and the public and private partnerships that are necessary to attract more investment to Canada. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to join today's discussion.
Merci tout le monde. Thank you for your kind words, Andrew. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for having me. I'll sign off and let you keep on going, but I'm just saying au revoir, à bientôt. Merci tout le monde.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Thank you very, very much for being with us today. I love your energy. It's very encouraging. I thought the optimism coming out of the panel followed by your energy. I think we're in good space right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Be well. And a big thank you, Brian. Thank you very much to Amgen for partnering with this very timely day. Obviously, great discussion. I was really encouraged by some of the ideas that came out of the panelists. Philip, obviously from Amgen, and Molly and Cynthia. Great news today from you and CCRM. Looking forward to building on that type of partnership and that type of investment in the ecosystem. So that's great to see. And so thanks again for today. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for being with us. A huge thank you to all of our other partners, in addition to Amgen, Admare, BioTalent, Le Fonds FTQ, Genome Canada, Iricor, and Novartis, all our partners in this session. Molly, you're back. Thank you, Molly, for being here today. Andre, thank you for a fantastic job. I'm just going through as you're popping up on my screen. Cynthia, great to see you. Thank you. Congratulations on the partnership today with Amgen. And Philip, again, congratulations, and look forward to working with you as well on some of the investment opportunities in Canada going forward. And thank you to all of the audience for being with us today. Stay tuned. There will be more BioNation panels and series. These are great, fantastic turnout today, and I really appreciate everybody's time. And I wish you all the best, good health, and get vaccinated as soon as you possibly can. I've had my AstraZeneca and I feel just great. So I encourage everybody to do likewise. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.